I think one can look at the great example of banking, and I think all of the banks know that their competition is coming from outside the industry. It's not coming from other banks. And I think one project that perhaps symbolically represents this collaboration really is R3. So it's great to have someone talking on that topic. Clive, Cooke, welcome, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, that's quite a tough act to follow. I thought that was absolutely excellent. And Farzan mentioned when he stood on stage that he started talking about the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. And I feel a little bit like a Christian being thrown to the lions this morning. So I'd like to talk to you about what is going on in the world of distributed ledgers, and you'll notice that I won't necessarily use the word blockchain too much, although I think generally speaking in the world we talk about blockchain and distributed ledgers in the same breath. But we at R3 have come across and have developed what is something slightly different from the traditional blockchain. But for the purposes of today, we'll continue talking about distributed ledgers and blockchain as being the same thing. So I'll tell you quickly how R3 came about. 2 years ago, David Rutter, who is the R of R3, had left the world of finance, where he'd had strong relationships in New York with major financial institutions, to head off to Silicon Valley to do his thing and find out what all the fuss was about with regard to Bitcoin. And during the course of tons of meetings with startups and with Bitcoin evangelists, he figured out reasonably early on that the technology that underpinned Bitcoin could well have relevance in the world of finance. So he went back to New York and he went up to a small group of ex-clients of his and said to them, I'm pretty sure that you guys at these banks don't have people who are spending their time exploring what's going on in the world of cryptocurrencies. And he was right, they didn't. So he essentially said to them, listen, I will put a group together and we will discuss and explore the potential for cryptocurrencies in the world of finance. And he managed to get 6 banks who came up with that notion and agreed with him. And so he announced on CoinDesk or wherever it had been that he'd got 6 banks who were interested in looking at the potential for Bitcoin in the world of finance. And suddenly he had 10, then he had 15, then he had 20. And within a very short space of time, put the shutters up and said, we can't do any more work because we're accepting too many banks. And we put the shutters up at 42 financial institutions who were prepared to invest time and money with a view to exploring how Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies could be applied to the world of finance. So that's the background as to how R3 came about, and it's only been 2 years, and the developments in that period have been enormous. And I think our first speaker today mentioned the fact that he believes that we're at that 1992 moment of the internet, and I think he's absolutely right. And it may be 1992, maybe 1994, not exactly sure, but it's not 2000. So we're definitely at the early stages of this technology and the application of this technology. And I don't think there is anybody who has all the answers. But I'm going to try today to give you some sort of insight as to what's actually going on, if you like, in the commercial world. assuming that this is working, which apparently it's not. So I'm going to take control here myself. So we all know that banks have been recording information and the way that they do business the same way for decades, if not longer. Everybody records a transaction that they enter into locally, stores it locally, keeps it to themselves, and at some stage during the future, they have to reconcile what they have recorded. They have to check what they've recorded with other people to ensure that the transaction they both agree on. And then, of course, they have to send that information off to other people, whether it's a regulator, whether it's a broker, whether it's a custodian. So banks, and let's stop saying banks, financial organizations hope that what they've recorded during the course of their business, they hope that what they've recorded is the same as what their counterparties have recorded. And of course, that's not always the case. And reconciliation and regulatory reporting is a big, big hurdle for financial organizations to get over. Now, as we all know, Bitcoin came along and disrupted how peers can transfer value between one another. And that really put the cat amongst the pigeons. And inspired by Bitcoin, not against Bitcoin, not in any way, in a negative way, inspired by Bitcoin, along came R3 to focus on collaboration in the world of finance. Counterparties connected to one another in the cloud, sharing only what needs to be shared on a finance-specific platform called Corda. And we'll talk a little bit more about Corda a little later. And the essence of everything that I've described so far can be summed up very, very simply, and that is that everyone is viewing the truth. The same information that I'm looking at, I know you're looking at. And not only am I looking at it, I know that you're looking at it, and you know that I'm looking at it. And that's a big, big deal. The fact that we're looking at a shared truth. And I can almost feel as if I can be done now. I can get off the stage and say that's it. Because it's such a fundamental thing. And the consequences of this, of course, for financial organizations is that they can apply cost reductions, they can settle transactions more quickly, there will be less errors, it's simpler, it will reduce fraud, where the information that I'm looking at is actually not true because it's been doctored. And there will be huge opportunities that will arise over the coming years. And I don't want to focus just on, the idea that these evil people that we're all against anyway, the banks, all they're going to do is implement this technology and fire people. So there'll be even more evil. There will be great opportunities that arise, just as in 1992, we had no idea that a third of the population would wake up in the morning and the first thing that they would do would be to reach across and look at their handheld device to share photographs that friends of theirs around the world, what they were doing the night before. There will be huge opportunities that arise. This isn't just about banks, evil banks, reducing costs and firing people. Now, of course, this shared truth that I've talked about, it doesn't work unless everybody's connected. So somebody used the analogy to me that it's a little bit like someone invented a telephone. I invented the telephone. That's fantastic. And do you know what? I'm going to keep it to myself. I'm not going to share it with anyone. It's amazing. You can all come around and have a look at it, and I'll show it to you, and I'll show you how it works. But it's mine. What's the point? The network is the key. And during the course of the last 18 months, the network of financial organizations is growing rapidly. And it's not just banks anymore, it's insurance companies, it's exchanges, it's regulators. And there is this huge coming together of collaboration. And I think if there's one point that I'd sort of like you to take away from that guy that was in the suit talking to the Bitcoin people, that one thing that you take away today, it's the collaboration element. That's the most important point. The collaboration between a new generation of people is like nothing we've ever seen before. And sort of anecdotally, you know, I was in Tokyo, and we have 6-member financial organizations in Tokyo. And we went there to try and get them together at a workshop to talk about what we were going to do and how we were going to collaborate with one another. And of course, you know, Japanese banking is pretty traditional. You know, there are branches everywhere. You start work at 21 and you leave when you're 65 and get a clock. It's pretty traditional. And these people, when they came to the workshop, and the people from, I'm not going to name names, stood there, and the other ones from the others stood there, and then when they all sat down, they sat in their little groups. And one of the newer Japanese institutions that's only been around for sort of 20 years and is a digital bank, they stood up, it had been prearranged, they stood up in front of everyone and presented a whole proof of concept that they've been working on to the group. And I was sort of standing at the side of the stage, and I could see the look on the faces of the traditional Japanese bankers. They were horrified, absolutely horrified that one financial organization that is out to kill all the others, because that's the way that banking is, that's the way that, you know, Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, the titans of the universe during the 80s and the 90s, that's the way they worked. You beat people to the deal, you pay yourself, you take huge risks. That's the way things were. And when this presentation was in full flow, I could see in the audience various other Japanese bankers getting their phones out and starting to take pictures of what was being presented to them. And the guy from the bank that was presenting said, whoa, 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 whoa. It's okay. Please don't, you know, put your hands up in the air so the person behind can't see. You don't have to worry about taking the pictures, because I'll give you the whole demonstration of what we've been working on and what we found. I'll send it to you, just give me your email addresses. And it was a, you know, tectonic shift in the way that people are collaborating with one another. And this is going on everywhere. And it's going on in South Africa as well. And our friends at Standard Bank and ABSA, who are both members of R3, will start collaborating from next week, not only with one another, but they'll be collaborating with ABN AMRO in Amsterdam, and they'll be collaborating with Daiwa in Tokyo, and they'll be collaborating with Bovespa in Brazil, sharing the learnings that they've encountered over the last year or so to the common good. So I think that's the most important point that I want to come across. And of course, the projects and the work that all these organizations are doing, sometimes they're grouped by region, a group of Korean banks working on a local, and sometimes they're based on the actual problem. And we kind of narrow down into sort of broad groups as to where these problems are. Every financial organization and lawyer and hospital and accountant in the world has to go through KYC, onboarding, identity, but actually the findings that we're coming to the conclusions of at the moment are that the identity should be governed by the individual, not by the bank. Let the individual have the key that opens and closes the access that people have to their private information. It isn't public knowledge, it's mine. Share registry, smart contracts. There's a huge amount of work going on in smart contracts. Trade finance. Trade finance is another area of the world where transactions between Samsung and a bank that's funding them, Barclays in London, is fraught not only with documentation that goes back and forth, but often the documentation cannot be trusted because they're not sharing the truth. The world of insurance, similarly, fraud is a huge problem in the world of insurance, and it's why my car insurance keeps going up every year. And I don't have accidents, but it's one of the factors. So there are a number of areas that people, as I said, by either geography or by problem, are coming together in an attempt to solve. I'm going to quickly talk about, and again, today's not about me showing up, coming here from London to talk to everybody here to try and sell something, because we're not here to sell you anything. We're here to inform you as to what's going on in the world, other than what's going on with Bitcoin and what's going on with Ethereum. And over the course of the last 18 months, and those of you that have been involved in cryptocurrencies since the outset in 2009-10, some of you will have come across a guy called Richard Brown, who's ex-IBM and is the Chief Technology Officer for R3. And Richard Brown, his role when he was sitting down and talking to these financial organizations that were joining R3 and were putting forward various people from their architecture groups to come round a table and discuss how are we going to implement Bitcoin or Ethereum to the world of finance. And it would have made his job and everybody else's job so much easier if we could have just done it and said, this is absolutely fine for a bank, for an insurance company, for an exchange. Bitcoin's perfect. It's absolutely brilliant. We're going to implement it, and it should take us 2 years. But it didn't work out like that, because he and the participants on the architecture groups from the members sat down and said, this just doesn't work. For us, it's not working. So he and those groups created and open sourced in November something that we call Corda. And it's inspired by Bitcoin, it's inspired by Ethereum and others. It's built specifically for financial markets. It's not for anarchists to shield their money from other people or to carry it around with them on the laptop. That's not what it's for. And I don't want to get the impression that anything we do is adversarial, because it's not. Corda is different. It's not better. It's not quicker. It's faster. It's different. It's built for the world of finance. It's built from the ground up as if we're dealing with financial organizations, not with individuals. And of course, there are a couple of major differences to Corda. It doesn't have a cryptocurrency attached to it. There is no cryptocurrency when two member banks or insurance companies or whoever it is transacting with one another. A cryptocurrency is not involved. So you might as well say, well, that's, you can leave now. We don't need you anymore because we're here to talk about cryptocurrencies. There is also another major issue here as well, and that is the sharing of the information. When a transaction occurs, as you all know, because you've all got Bitcoin, when a transaction occurs, that transaction is shared by everybody. That transaction joins a block, the block joins the chain. You can't have that in finance because Standard Bank don't want ABN AMRO to know what they just did. Why on earth would they do that? Otherwise, every single transaction that anybody ever enters into in the world of finance is viewed by everybody else. There is, for those of you that are technically minded, there are a couple of really interesting papers that I think you should read, written by Richard Gendel Brown. One of them is a non-technical white paper on Corda. One of them is a technical white paper on Corda. And last week, he, on his blog, wrote a really simple posting about how it actually works. And this is what we are doing in the world of finance. And, as I said, today is about just telling you what we're doing. We're not trying to sell anything to you. But the idea that, we're creating, if you like, the underlying platform that applications in the world of KYC, in the world of insurance, there could be hundreds of applications. And we won't be building all those applications, but some of you might. Some of you who are here who work for startups that have got some brilliant coders and some fantastic ideas as to how the world of finance can be affected by digital ledger technology will become vendors to us and to member banks. And that's kind of relevant because that's how we, as a firm, how we collaborate. So our network looks like the iOS that you're all familiar with. And I think it's important that, this, as I said before, it's all about collaboration. And people, you'll be hearing from people later today from Ripple and digital asset. And you'll say, oh, well, you're all against one another, aren't you? You're in competition with these people. We're not really. There is a lot of collaboration that goes on. There's a lot of contact that goes on. As I said before, this is 1992 to 1996 of the internet. And we all know the list of companies that went bust, that are not around today, that were market leaders during that period. So I think it's pretty arrogant of anyone to actually stand up and say they know exactly where this technology is leading and where we're all headed. I think it's important as well just to mention the regulatory outreach, because the regulator, and Farzam was very eloquent when he talked about the traffic lights. The regulators are not going away. Circumventing regulators is not a business model for anyone. And it's important that you bring the regulator, one brings the regulator into this space. And we try our best to bring regulators on board. We have done work on Ethereum, not Corda. We've done work on Ethereum with the Central Bank of Canada. We are doing work at the moment with the Monetary Authority of Singapore, where they're moving their currency around in tokenized form on a ledger. The regulators need to be part of the solution. They are not part of the problem. And we would hope that not only the engagement that we have with various regulators around the world, but actually evolves into regulators around the world dealing with one another by using and by utilizing this technology. So I hope that I've given you some sort of food for thought. As I said, this was really just about us coming to South Africa, where there's clearly a lot of interest in what's going on in the space. Things are not set in stone yet. Nobody knows how it's going to pan out. But I think it's kind of interesting for you guys to hear what's going on in the world other than necessarily the world of Bitcoin and Ethereum. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Clive. Any questions for Clive? No? We're going to, yep, one here. If we could just have a microphone, please.
Just a short one. I just wanted to know if you could just provide us with a little bit of information how Corda helps individuals.
Well, Corda will help individuals. Again, I think going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, this notion that banks are evil and the world will get worse the stronger and more efficient that banks become is incorrect. I think that since 2009, there has been a new generation of people that are entering the world of finance. And when I sit down and talk to the groups of young people who are involved in this space at the moment, I detect, and I don't think it's bullshit, by the way, I detect a real sense of, I want to do something that's better for the world, and I don't necessarily want to atone for what the banks did in 2008-9, but I want the world to be a better place. And I don't think that there's anybody at the moment in this space who believes that the world needs to become a worse place and that the individuals in this space can't do work for good. And I genuinely think that there is a groundswell of young people who are replacing old farts like me who have a different agenda in the world. And, you know, it's difficult for me to put my finger on this and say, well, how's my life going to improve? I don't know, but it might.
Great. Any more questions? Someone right at the back. Thank you.
Thanks for your talk. Would you mind going back to your slides that mentioned inspiration from Bitcoin?
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah. One more. There we go.
This one?
Right. So, blockchain expired, excuse me, but so the best bits from Bitcoin, Ethereum and others. So the points I see listed there, consensus and data privacy, I mean, smart contracts are another issue. How does that differ from the way you've been running things before? Because I would assume that before consensus was achieved on an individual basis rather than the system level, and the data privacy would also have been secured. And how does this profit from the innovation of Bitcoin to have a trustless system?
The relevant part here is the fact that individuals or individual people utilizing the technology can share the truth. By sharing the truth and by having the ability to transact things more quickly than they have traditionally,
Right.
then that is relevant to the fact that things that have up to now required reconciliation that can take days, and clearing
So
that can take days.
Right. So I agree.
Happens more quickly.
Thanks. So I do not doubt that this is going to improve the efficiency of your systems and is going to have benefits. But does this benefit not just come then from the unification of a system that was before distraught and is now like a universal standard?
Well, we all know that the genius of Bitcoin is the fact that there was nothing new about it. Most of the technology that was...
Well, there was nothing new about the technological pieces, but the thing that it enabled...
It was the bringing together of it.
Right, but the bringing together created something that wasn't there before, which is the trustless nature, which this doesn't have.
Correct.
Exactly.
Correct. And again, the fact that Corda and financial organizations will work with one another in a trusted environment, and members, of course, that are utilizing the technology will be within a trusted network. And that's the key here. And I know we can debate whether it's trusted or untrusted or permissioned or unpermissioned, but that's a conversation that could go on ad infinitum.
All right, thanks.
Great. Any more questions? One more over here. So it's a tough crowd. You're not going to get off.
Yeah, I know. I always knew it was going to be a tough crowd.
Hi, Clive. Just the nature of Corda relies on some central authority issuing value on the platform in the case of currency, transactions involving currency or money movement. So we presume that would be central banks. So
Yeah.
what does that then in the future state mean for the actual bank?
Well, the relationship between the central bank and the banks is going to change, I think, over time. And the idea that necessarily central bank and governmental policy has to derive from the bank's relationship with the central bank could change. It could change. That the idea that a central bank can digitally affect the money supply by not going through banks and entering into the system directly is something that's, that has potential. But again, this is early days. So there are possibly 5 or 6 central banks in the world who've been experimenting with this, not 180. It's early days, and I wouldn't want to be the one that stands here and tells you this is how it's going to be.
Over there, just next to the pole. Thanks.
Hi, sorry.
Hi.
So my question's really around what the benefit is for us as customers of banks.
Yeah.
One assumes that when I transfer money with Standard Bank using Corda, it's going to cost me significantly less. I mean, is that you've got a distributed ledger, one version of the truth,
Yeah.
an easy way to drop banking charges.
Yeah.
This would drive me to someone who's using Corda,
Yeah.
so I would move away from the banks that weren't on that list.
Yeah.
So maybe it's really for someone like Standard Bank or ABSA to answer whether I can actually expect that.
And I don't think they will be able to answer you, because this is, as I said before, the idea that the way that the trillions of dollars that are transferred between users at the moment is going to change overnight is just not true. It won't, yes, of course, there are plenty of people, including representatives of companies here, who've coming up with some pretty smart ways of changing the way that value is moved around the world, and that when you're paying somebody in the UK or in Germany, that that payment process can be improved. And I think that's what everybody is working towards. But we are definitively, and I want to make very, very clear here, that whereas we think that there will be applications of digital ledger technology that may come into force, and it will be something relatively straightforward. It'll be it'll be something in trade finance where I can agree that the invoice that I sent you and you received and you're looking at the same thing that I'm looking at and nobody's interfered with it. But this notion of, oh, well, you're going to create something that's going to mean that I can transfer money from here to Europe much more quickly, much more cheaply to me. Yes, that is the goal, but it isn't going to happen this year and it isn't going to happen next year. This is, the building blocks. You're looking at the building blocks of something that is going to be in place for 25 years. This isn't a quick fix. So I'm sorry that I didn't really answer the question definitively, but that's because it's not that time yet, but it's coming.
Any more? Great, Clive, thanks very much for coming all the way out here. I know it's hard
Thank you. You weren't that tough.